everyone, it's Bryony. Welcome back to my channel. So in today's video, I'm going to be addressing one of what I feel is the most pervasive myths around having children, and that's the idea that there is ever a perfect time to have them. Before we get any further though, first of all, for those of you who might be here for the first time, hi, I'm Bryony. I'm a solo mum to a 1-year-old in the UK, and solo mum is the term we use here to describe a single parent by choice. I gave birth to my son when I was just 25, and to many people that seems like quite a young age to go down the solo donor conception route. However, there were many factors leading me to make that decision, and this video is not going to be specifically about that because I've discussed that in many other videos talking about why I became a solo mum at the age I did. But I did want to talk a bit more about how this idea that there is ever a perfect time to have children can actually make the decision to have children even more difficult, because a lot of people worry about getting it wrong. There are three main topics I want to cover in this video, so let's jump right on into the first one. There is no such thing as a perfect time to have a baby. I don't know about you guys, but growing up I very much was surrounded with the narrative that you go to school, you go to university, you meet somebody, you settle down, you build your career, and then when you've built your career, you're married and you own your own house, that is the point at which you decide, let's have children. And when it comes to the fertility side of things, education around where your most fertile years are, how fertility works, how you're born with all your own eggs and how they decline in time, I certainly never had any of that. The only sort of fertility education I got at school was if you have sex without protection, you will get pregnant. And to be fair, yes, while you're a teenager, that may well be the case, but 20 years after that, you may be in a very different situation, actually finding it's not so easy to get pregnant. But certainly from my own experience, and I feel probably the majority of people's experiences, I never had that sort of education. It was only around use protection. And when it comes to the other side of things, the going to school, going to university, settling down, getting married, buying a house, having kids, those are all great things. I'm not against any of that. But in a modern world, actually, increasingly, things don't happen either in that order, or some of those things don't happen at all for many people. And that's where a lot of people who end up going down the solo parenthood route, especially solo mums, to be honest, end up finding themselves. They've gone to school, gone to university, built a great career, probably also bought a house or a flat or some sort of property, but they just haven't met the right partner. And that then forces them to face this question, actually, how much longer am I going to be fertile for? And do I want kids? Is this something really important to me? Because if so, I probably need to look at doing this now. But actually, I don't think this is something that just affects solo parents. This is something that can affect anybody. For example, you may be someone that has actually met a partner and you know that you want to have children, but for whatever reason, like maybe you struggled at school, or you didn't go to university, or you went to university but you haven't managed to find a job in that particular field, and you haven't managed to get on the property ladder, or for whatever reason, like financially and career-wise, you're a little bit behind where you might have expected to be, but you're in a relationship and you're at a point in your life where you're thinking, actually, I'd quite like children, but my career isn't there yet. There are many different ways in which this sort of projected path that we're told about doesn't work for everybody. It's also possible, and this is increasingly happening, I think, to people, where they do actually tick all these boxes. They go to school, they go to university, they start a career, they meet someone, they settle down, they buy a property, and then they get to the point where they're like, actually, we're thinking about having kids now. Maybe they've done some traveling as well. But at this point, their fertility is no longer in a place where that's possible for them, or it's extremely difficult for them to get pregnant. And many people are taken aback by this because you're always told this is the way you should do things. And to a certain extent, I think a lot of people assume that by doing that, once you get to the end of that stage, you're still going to be in a place where you're fertile. And sadly, that is just not the case for everybody. And this is why I think this idea that there is a perfect time to have children is really damaging. So I want to be really clear, as somebody who has had a child and who had fertility issues that contributed to me having my children early, that there really is no such thing as a perfect time to have a baby. However, there are better and worse times to have children, and that is really what you should bear in mind if you are thinking about having children at some point in the future. It's also worth noting that the times that are better and worse for you to have a baby may be completely different from the times that are better and worse for somebody else to have a baby. For example, you may be in a very similar position to where I was, where you know you have an underlying fertility issue that is going to restrict the time that you are fertile and are able to have children, but you may not be at a point where your career is at the place where you consider it the best time to have a baby. So the best time for you to have children fertility-wise is not the best time for you to have children career-wise. And these two conflicting things can be quite tricky to align and come to a place where you're like, okay, and want to make a decision one way or another. But I think for the majority of people, they have an idea that their fertility is going to decline at some point in the sort of distant future. There's no particular date around it. But most people aren't aware of when that is going to be for them. There are certain tests you can do, for example, to see how your fertility is performing right now, to see if you have a low ovarian reserve, which basically means that you have less eggs than someone on average your age has, and that means that your fertile window is not going to last as long as somebody who's got more eggs. And you can also go and have internal scans done as well, and this can monitor several things, such as looking at the shape of your uterus and looking at your ovaries to see how many follicles you've got there, and that can be another indicator of how your fertility is. But unless you deliberately go out there and seek to do these tests, most people don't until they are much further down the line and actually thinking of having children at some point in the near future by the point they do these tests. But I think for many people, they focus more on the career side of things. So finishing their education, starting a career, building their way up the career ladder in whatever field they're in, and getting to a point where they feel pretty stable in their career or where they've reached a certain place that they wanted to get to before having children. And this is not necessarily a bad thing. In fact, I'm definitely not saying it's a bad thing. You know, stability financially and in terms of job security is a really great thing to have, particularly having children. You want as much stability as possible. But there are some things I think you should think about when it comes to looking at your career as a measurement of when the time is right to have children. You don't need to build a career before having a baby. This is probably the most controversial part of this video because, again, it's something that we are told from the time that we are quite small that we need to have a career and then have our children. But being in the position I'm in right now with a 1-year-old and with people around me starting to go back to work, most people in the UK take a year off for maternity leave, I have noticed something very, very interesting that's happening amongst some of my mum friends. And that's really why I wanted to share this video today, because I find this fascinating. When it comes to continuing your career post-baby, things don't always go to plan. I have been really struck by the number of women that I know who are now returning to work but have opted to return part-time. And I'm even more intrigued by the number of women who have attempted to return to work part-time but whose employers wouldn't allow that to happen or weren't willing to be flexible with them, who've then decided to quit their careers entirely, either to stay home and just focus on raising their children or to do something that's a lot more flexible around childcare. And this is something I found truly fascinating because I honestly only know 1 or 2 women who have opted to go back to work full-time by choice. I will say though that amongst my solo mum friends, the number of them who are doing this, who are, going part-time or leaving their jobs if they're not willing to work part-time, is much lower. There's a much higher proportion of them who are working full-time. But in all honesty, when I've spoken to them, only 1 or 2 actually really want to be working part-time. The others, again, were either in a position where flexible working wasn't an option for them, but they need the income from their job to cover the cost of living, obviously, and childcare costs are quite expensive. But generally speaking, when it comes to my solo mum friends, they have been less able to be more flexible with their careers because they've got no one else to rely on for a financial income. We're obviously doing this on our own. And so if they want to work part-time, but they haven't got a flexible employer, currently, it's just not something that they are able to consider. But I will be really interested to see what happens over the next couple of years and how many people shift careers or go into different sectors in order to make what they do more compatible with working more part-time or having more flexible hours or whatever. But for my non-solo mum friends, it has been really interesting to see how many of them have actually completely opted out of the workplace to go off and do something very different, like a kind of more of a side hustle thing. I mean, like yoga, Pilates, that kind of stuff. Or who have decided to completely shift career, or who have decided that they're just not going back to work at all after they've had their children. And I think it's really interesting to see this because from the time that we're quite small, we're told that your career is the most important thing and you need to build that up to a place where you're then in a stable position, that you can have your children and then you can continue working your career whilst you have your children and make your way up the career ladder again while that's happening. To see how many mums I know who have either intentionally or unfortunately sometimes by force blown up their careers when they've had children has been quite extraordinary for me to see because you've done everything you've been told to get to this place and then you get there and you're like, actually this career isn't working for me now for whatever reason, or I don't want to do this career anymore, or actually I want to step off the career ladder for a bit and just coast for a bit, or I just want to work part-time for a bit whilst I focus on my children. The number of people who do that is quite extraordinary. And what I want the main takeaway from that to be is the fact that even if you get to a place where you have the most amazing career and you're doing exceptionally well in your work life, that may all change after you've had children, either because you want it to change. The number of women who I've seen who, when they were pregnant, were saying, no, I'm going to go back to work full time, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. And then once the baby's here, they've actually kind of changed their opinions on that, and that's not what they've wanted anymore, which, by the way, is totally fine to do. You are always entitled to change your mind about things like this. But if you're somebody who's not quite reached that point in your career where you thought you'd be before you had children, but you're really like, actually now is the time I probably need to do this, what I'm trying to say here is don't worry too much about it, because your feelings around your career after you've had children might be completely different. They might be the same. You might be really keen to get back to work and you want to work full time, which is absolutely fine too. But just bear in mind that that may well not be the case, and that's okay too. So maybe don't worry so much about getting to the perfect point in your career before having children. So when it comes to my own situation here, I actually happen to have had my son during a bit of a career break, or a career shift, I should say. I knew when I made the decision that I wanted to have a baby on my own, that I was at this kind of critical point for me in terms of shifting my career. I had 3 main incomes at that point in time, all of which were, I knew, not going to be viable in the long run. So I think I was running my YouTube channel at the time, but I was barely giving it any attention because I was really focused on fostering. That was my main thing I was doing at the time. But I was completely burnt out by the system, and I knew I didn't want to continue doing that. So that at the time was my main source of income, because when you foster, like, you're so in that, like, so focused on it, and it's so intense that you really can't work much around it. So that was my main source of income. And then I also ran a small business at the same time too, but I'd lost my passion for that business, and I knew it wasn't something that I was going to keep going forever with. And so I decided I wanted to get it to its 10th birthday, and then I was going to shut it down. So I had these 3 main sources of income, all of which were probably not going to be viable for me over the next couple of years. And I wasn't 100% sure what I wanted to shift myself into doing, but I also was very aware that starting a new career at that point would probably not be the best time to start trying to get pregnant at the same point, because I would probably need to take a couple of years to get to a point in my career where I felt like, okay, I've reached a stable area where I'm happy to have children now. I feel like I can do that without hurting my career prospects too much. And honestly, I just didn't have the time with my fertility to do that. So I really had to bite the bullet and make the decision to have a baby at that point where I wasn't really sure what my career was going to be doing in the future. And that felt terrifying, but has turned out to be probably one of the best decisions that I made, because it's given me this opportunity where I'm able to work very part-time, just doing little things here and there. I'd already cut down my living expenses a lot, so we live on quite a small income, and we can get by quite easily, and that's allowed me a lot of flexibility in only having to work. Well, I'm now upping my days to twice a week rather than once a week up until this point. And it gives me lots of time to spend with my son, which is something that I really wanted to do. And that's required quite a lot of flexibility to do that. And being in the middle of a career break has really enabled me to be in a position to do that. So actually turned out to be a really good thing. And the other thing that I think is really important to mention around the idea of having a career break when you have children is, if you're like me and you're, in your mid-20s, let's say I decided to have a 5-year career break. So from 25 to 30, I didn't want to work at all, or I wanted to work very minimally, not really focusing on anything, which I don't think I personally will do. I am still working part-time, as I said before.
Hi, Scruffy Editing Bryony here. I just wanted to add in at this point that when I'm talking about work here, I'm referring to paid for work, because I absolutely believe that raising children is a full-time job. It is work to raise your kids. So even if you do decide not to do paid for work, you are still working. And I just want to make that very clear, because I realise I don't think I covered that in this video or made that clear enough that, I'm only talking about paid for work here, but obviously raising children is still a full-time job.
But let's say that I didn't. Let's say I have a partner and I don't need to work to financially contribute to the house, and I decide to take a break of 5 years and start working again at 30. Somebody who is my generation, realistically, we're going to be working until we're at least 70. So if I start a career at 30, I've got 40 years to build a new career. So when we talk about this idea of like you need to build your career, we forget that actually the younger generations like me, Gen Z, we're going to be working a lot longer, because, if you look at how retirement works and the pension system, etc., it's almost inevitable we're going to be working to 70. But even if I didn't, even if I worked to just 60 and I start a career at 30, that's still a 30-year career. That's still a really good period of time to build a career up. So I think this idea that we need to build it before we have children is, I don't want to say outdated. There are very good reasons why you'd want to build a career, like the financial stability you can get from that. But generally speaking, as we go up the career ladder and as our income increases, we tend to increase our living costs with it. So actually, if you're lower down the career ladder or you have a lower income, you've probably already adjusted your living to that lower income. And the higher you go, the more you probably adjust your income to that. You probably live somewhere more expensive. You probably have a bigger property. You might have a more expensive car, all sorts of things. So actually, in terms of how much free money you have after your expenses, that tends to not be too different until you go much further up the pay scale. So even if you're somebody who's on a lower income, if you're able to live off that lower income, if you've got your lifestyle matching your income level, you're probably going to be in just as good a position now to have a baby as you would be if you waited until you were further up the career ladder, especially if you're somebody who ends up kind of increasing your expenses as you go up the ladder. So I do think that is something else worth bearing in mind when it comes to thinking about when the right time to have children is. And finally, the most important thing about this entire topic is you make it work. Whatever time you have your children and however you decide to have them, you will make it work because you kind of have to. And yes, it may be more of a struggle at certain points in your life than it would be at others. And of course, there are very good reasons why you might want to avoid that if you have choice in the matter. But ultimately, whatever time it happens, you will make it work because it's just what we do. So if you're at the point where you're thinking that you really would like to have children now, or you're at a position where you kind of need to make that decision now for whatever reason, then just take heart in the fact that you will be able to make it work. There are some things that you can do to make having a child easier for you though, and I'd say the most important one is to focus on your financial stability. Are you living within your means? Can you cut down on any of your monthly incomes? Are there any subscriptions you're paying for that you don't need, like a gym membership, for example? Have you built up a good amount of savings? Can you work on that over the next year? There are so many things that you can do to really get yourself in the best position possible. And most people find that it's easier to cut down their living expenses than it is to increase their income. So really focus on minimizing your cost of living and getting that to a point where it's as small as possible. And that is going to put you in a much better position when it comes to having children, regardless of what point on the career ladder you're at. If you have financial stability, if you're living within your means, you will almost certainly be able to make it work, no problem. So I really hope this video was comforting to any of you out there who are currently in a place where you're thinking about having children and you're really worried about making the right decision to have them at the perfect time. Just know it doesn't exist. There are better and worse times, and try and pick one of the best times you can. But even if for whatever reason you end up having a baby during one of your worst times, you can still make it work. You will still make it work. Focus on your financial stability, focus on your network around you of support that you can lean on, and ultimately know that whatever tough times come your way, you will get through them. A year on from having my son in what could easily be considered one of the worst times to have a baby in the middle of a career gap, and also solo, I would not change a thing. It's been an amazing experience. As I said, I really focus on the financial side of it, of getting my expenses down and living within my means, and that's made it very possible for me to do this, and also having an incredible network of support around me, particularly my parents as well, has also been something that's made it really enjoyable. Thank you so much for watching, guys. Do please subscribe, and I look forward to seeing you in next week's video. Bye everyone, have a great day.